And now it's my honor to hand the mic over to our fantastic artists. We are so thrilled to have the Women in Animation group here today, and I'll hand it over to Jenna Olson from WIA to introduce the group.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. My name is Jenna Olson. I am the Director of Operations for WIA, Women in Animation. I'm happy to be introducing you to our panelists today. But before I get started, before we do that, I'm going to take a moment to share with you the important work we are doing here at WIA. So WIA is an advocacy nonprofit. We've been in existence for over 25 years, and our mission is to advance women and other underrepresented genders in the field of animation. In short, we're working towards a world where all genders share equally in the creation, production, and rewards of animation. It's a big, big thing. And our major goal is to reach gender parity in the animation workforce by 2025. We've got a lot of different programs to help us get there. And I'll explain a bit about them. But for more information and to learn how to get involved and support WIA, I definitely encourage you to go to womeninanimation.org to learn more. So a bit about our programs. Our most well-known program is our mentorship circles, where we pair motivated, hardworking, dedicated students and professionals looking to advance their career in animation, wherever you are, at whichever stage in life you are, whichever stage you are at work. You can be mentored by established animation professionals over the course of 6 weeks. It's a really great opportunity. Some other things we've got going on, we recently released our WIA talent database. This is basically an answer to folks that say, we want to hire people of underrepresented genders, but there are none. We don't know where to find them. Well, this is the answer to that. This database increases the visibility of the amazing pool of underrepresented talent around the world. Women, trans, and non-binary talent can add themselves to the database, and then it's available and presented to studios across the industry. It's a very exciting project, and I definitely encourage you to go to our website and sign yourself up into the database. There's no cost to it. It's open. Just go ahead. We're also really proud and excited to be partnering on a new program with the Brick Foundation, VES, the California Department of Education, and Epic Games to develop a high school apprenticeship program to create an alternate pathway into animation for young people that can't afford expensive art schools. So that's a bit about WIA, but without further ado, let's see who we've got on our panel today. So we have first Victoria Ying. Victoria is a critically acclaimed author and artist living in Los Angeles. Her film credits include Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, Frozen, Paperman, Big Hero 6, and Moana. She's the illustrator on DC's Diana, Princess of the Amazons, and the author and illustrator of City of Secrets. Her upcoming graphic novel projects include the sequel to City of Secrets, City of Illusion, and Hungry Ghost. She loves Japanese curry, putting things in her shopping cart online, and taking them out again and hanging out with her dopey dog. Chrystin Garland is a visual development artist from Los Angeles. She's currently working at Netflix Animation on My Dad, the Bounty Hunter. She's had the pleasure of working on several series such as She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, The Midnight Gospel, and the Emmy Award-winning Nico and the Sword of Light. When not at her drawing table, Chrystin enjoys watching scary movies, salsa dancing, and eating spicy noodles. I wonder if that all happens at the same time. Claire Keane is an illustrator and visual development artist who contributed to the Disney films Enchanted, Tangled, Wreck-It Ralph, and Frozen. She's the daughter of Disney animator Glenn Keane and the granddaughter of Thelma Keane and cartoonist Bill Keane, creator of the comic strip The Family Circus. Gabby Zapata is from sunny Los Angeles, California. After graduating from the Ringling College of Art and Design with BFA in computer animation, she worked at Digital Domain Studios in Port St. Lucie, Florida, as a visual development artist for their feature-length animation film, The Legend of Tembo. Fast forward to today, she's working at Disney as a lead visual development artist, providing art direction for their social media department, managing and creating original artwork content for various brand platforms. And then our moderator for today is Alison Mann. She's a talented manager and co-president of Fourth Wall Animation at Fourth Wall Management. In her role, Mann is responsible for managing talent and strategizing the development and talent for the feature film, international and series-based projects, collaborating with business affairs, recruiting, and the creative team to foster new relationships with key creatives in the animation industry. Mann is also the co-founder and CEO of the Brick Foundation, an organization set up to solve how to create new access points for women and people from underrepresented groups so they can excel at creative leadership and to enable culture change through engaging and empowering talent. Mann is passionate about storytelling and identifying and working with inspiring creators that can continue to elevate the animation industry. So, Alison, I leave it to you.
Thank you, Jenna, for such the amazing intro. It's so kind, and WIA is doing such amazing things. I'm so excited to hang out with you, all my fellow women of animation, this Friday afternoon. Hopefully everybody had their lunch and we're very hydrated because we're going to be drawing and talking. And so I would love to kick it off as we're starting off this session. Maybe we will start with Claire because she's the closest to me in my square bubbles. What has been your artist journey, and when did you realize that drawing could turn into a profession?
Oh, that is such a good question. Well, drawing has been a part of my life forever, or since as long as I can remember. Watching my dad do it as his profession and watching my grandfather do it for his own profession, I never questioned the idea that like artistry could be somebody's career. But I didn't think about getting into animation until I was in art school, and I was going to art school for graphic design. But, and so I was just looking at everybody around me, and everybody wanted to be doing like art direction for like layouts of magazines. And so naturally, since that's what was around me, that's what I was aspiring to do, although I just really was not very good at it. And what I really liked to do was illustrate and tell stories through my drawings. And one day I was talking to my dad about it. I'm like, oh, I just wish that I could somehow like just do this all day, like develop like what a character would look like, how she would think, like what does she wear, stuff like this. And he was like, you know, that job exists in animation. It's called visual development. I was like, wait, what? And so
mind blown.
Yeah. And so then I was like, wait a second, I just kind of completely come back full circle to where I guess I started with my family being in that world, and realizing that that's what kind of came naturally to me as an artist, was to tell these stories through my drawings, and that's where I wanted to be.
That's awesome. Talk a little bit about then putting together your portfolio, like going from college and then getting into kind of your first job, and what was your first job, and what was that process like? The interview process, the putting together the portfolio process, like, was it intimidating for you? Was it like, did you have self-doubt? Was there imposter syndrome? Like, what was going through your mind when you were entering?
Every single time I have to put together my portfolio, like, oh gosh, all of it. But when till this day, you're still. Yeah, for sure. But when I first put together my my thesis project, it was a big fairy tale book, and a fairy tale that I had written and illustrated, and I presented it at my art school. That was like, it was a really cool art school, like for graphic designers, and it was in Paris, and I presented it, and one of the jury was like, so you're you're 21? I was like, yeah. And he said, aren't you a little embarrassed to be doing fairy tales? And I was like, I wasn't until this moment, but I guess so. Yes, I am now. But then I realized, like, I really love doing this. And I don't care if that's embarrassing, like, I just kind of want to do it. And so I put together a portfolio to work on Tangled, because my dad was directing that at the time. And I wanted to move back to Los Angeles so that I could work at Disney on Tangled. And in the meantime, I moved back to Los Angeles and started a graphic design job in a company where I was doing like a lot of like presentations and stuff. And it was really fun to like see, okay, this is one world, and then this was another world. And so once I started at Disney, it was just eye-opening to see, oh, these people just live and breathe this, like, this space that I feel so natural in.
Do you remember what you put in your portfolio to get you your job?
Well, I remember my dad telling me, just put a lot of like process drawings in there. Like a lot of like, don't worry about like how good the drawing looks. Focus more on showing the process of getting there. And I didn't really understand it at the time, but now I understand that really the way somebody thinks and the way you arrive at an idea can be a lot more intriguing and captivating than how you actually technically draw an idea.
I like that.
So there was a lot of that in there. And there was my fairy tale portfolio that somebody told me I should have been embarrassed about.
Never be embarrassed.
Yeah.
Fairy tales are forever.
Right.
Yeah. We all live in it. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Chrystin, I'm going to you next. Same question, which is, what is your artist journey, and when did you realize that drawing could turn into a profession?
Oh gosh, I feel like my journey was very much all over the place. I always drew ever since I was little, and it was very much my parents realized they could just give me a sketchbook and I would entertain myself. And I always knew I wanted to draw professionally, but I didn't really know what that would look like. At the time, I was really into reading comics and manga, so I thought like, oh yeah, maybe I'll make my own comic one day, and that would be super cool. And then I went to the Academy of Art University for like a summer program, and all of the sequential art courses were full. And I remember being very upset because I was just like, ugh, animation, lame. I don't want to do that.
Tell me how you really feel.
Right. But then that was the thing though, because when I sat down and actually saw my drawings moving for the first time, I thought, wow, this is so cool. Now I want to do this. So I wound up going to college at SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design, for traditional animation. And when I graduated, the industry was completely in the middle of a huge shift. So there just wasn't a lot of work for 2D animation. And I also did Flash too, but I wasn't finding a lot of jobs for that. So I thought, okay, what's the next best thing, or not next best thing, but what's something else that I can do? Because I still just want to create. And I thought, well, I have Photoshop on my little computer. So I guess I'll just teach myself how to digitally paint. And from there, I wound up getting a bunch of random gigs, and that eventually led to comics. So worked in comics for a little bit. I did some animation work for like an indie video game and for some educational games. And then eventually, and all during that time, I was, when I was working in games, I was doing like daily doodles and just trying to get better at painting. eventually Titmouse reached out with the Nico and the Sort of Light project. And I think that was my first gig designing for animation. So that was a lot of fun.
How interesting though. It's like you wanted to do comics. You ended up going to school for animation. Getting out of school, you go into comics and then eventually go back into animation.
Yeah.
You so do you like what do you feel like that experience kind of teaches you, or advice you would give individuals? Do you feel like it matters what you major in ultimately, or do you feel like you got enough foundation even in the animation space where you felt comfortable doing sequential art or working on comics, whether it's doing color or, you know, the sequences?
Right. I think whatever job I had, I felt like there was definitely a learning curve. There are certain skills that you learn, especially if you're studying a creative field. There are certain skills that can pivot to different disciplines, but in many ways, you still feel like you're starting from scratch. So I think with my personal journey, it really just taught me how to think on my toes and to be proactive with my education post-college. And yeah, I think there are so many other artists as well who either weren't able to go to an art school or went to college and took a field that was maybe completely outside of anything creative. And because there are so many resources online nowadays, you can still continue your education and you can still work your way up to a goal working professionally in the arts. It's totally possible. I think it's just about making a plan for yourself and your education, doing research and sticking with it. Because yeah, when you start off with any discipline, you're going to feel like you suck and you should just give up. And I think if you just keep pushing at it, you'll see improvement and you'll get better.
Did you, like, when you were looking at like the comics that you were like as a teenager and the were you mimicking kind of the, like, in your own sketchbooks? Like, would you kind of look and draw what they were drawing to kind of practice? Like, what kind of resources did you kind of teach yourself through your own observation?
Oh yeah, like at the time I actually was doing a lot of design work and not really even noticing it, because I would take my Magic Knight of Ray Earth manga or my Sailor Moon manga and I would try and break down the different styles. So I just remember drawing pages upon pages of different eye shapes that I found in like different cartoons and anime that I watched, and breaking down body proportions. So it really, that, even though I didn't understand that these were design techniques at the time, I was honing in on that, and that was something I was naturally drawn to. And I even remember, oh my gosh, I like drawing a whole page of my own like Sailor Scout character doing a transformation sequence. They were like tiny thumbnails, and it filled up the entire 8.5 by 11 page. And I didn't realize that those were technically like boards. But to me at the time, I just wanted to like have that cool transformation sequence laid out, and I could envision it. So yeah, those were some things that I picked up. And also there were tons of artists online. Well, not tons, but there were a few artists online at the time, like Julie Dillon and Barachan, who were posting a lot of work and sometimes tutorials. And I would print out their tutorials and I would put it in a binder. And I remember bringing it to recess, like, this is the Bible, you guys. Like, I've cracked the code. They teach you about form and inking. And it was just this great discovery at the time, because no one was teaching this in my art classes.
That's awesome. And what would you give that advice to other people? Because sometimes I feel like when I'm talking to students or they're trying to figure out where to go within their own careers, there's so many resources, which is all based in kind of observation or even art books or comics that they're looking at. So there's ways to kind of train yourself in a way that doesn't, you know, is that kind of advice you would give? Is like
definitely doing like master copies, I guess, of shows that you like, and then taking those copies and really studying them and breaking down the shape language for each show, because each show has a completely different art direction, and you can learn a lot from that. Also, there are a bunch of tutorials online. So if you check out your favorite artists, a lot of them have either tutorials, some of them are teaching classes. Here's LightBox Expo, Schoolism. I'm a Schoolism instructor. Victoria's a Schoolism instructor. So there's tons of resources online that you can utilize for your education in the arts. It's just about researching and finding where they're at.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing.
No problem.
All right. Victoria, you're up next. What has been your artist journey, and when did you realize that drawing could turn into a profession?
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. Yeah, I actually I echo a lot of like what Chrystin said, because I had a lot of the same experiences where I, grew up with manga and anime, and that was really my first exposure to art as a profession and something that was, created by adults. I think you don't really think about it until you're much older. But my first manga was Ranma 1/2, which is like a comedy action manga written by a woman. And, just seeing her and seeing like her name as the only name on that comic book made me feel like, oh my God, that's so cool. She wrote and illustrated this, and I want to do that. So like that was definitely my goal. In my 8th grade yearbook, it says that I want to move to Japan and become a mangaka. I moved away from that because all through high school, all through middle school, I wanted to draw comics. But when I got to art school, because I focused so much on the art side of things, someone told me, they're like, hey, there's like no money in comics, right? And I was like, what? And it turns out that is kind of true. It's very difficult to financially make a career in comics. And so I kind of took that as a pivot to be like, okay, well, what is out there that actually is a more sustainable career, but is also using a lot of the same skills that I'm learning and that I want to do, like world building, character design, all that stuff was always really intriguing to me. So I found entertainment design, which, film, television, video games, that was kind of the realm. And I knew that I wanted to pursue a career in animation because stylistically, it really felt like the most welcoming for the kind of stuff that I wanted to make. So I went to Disney and I started as an apprentice there. Claire was actually my mentor during that time, which was very cool. I got to learn a lot from all the people who worked there. And, I really grew a lot as an artist. I was there for 8 years before I kind of, I was at Disney for a long time. And then I realized that like I'd really forgotten the storytelling side of myself. And I ended up like taking a leave and going to publishing, because I realized that even though I was doing a lot of the stuff that I wanted to do with character design and stuff, I wasn't doing the storytelling side. So I switched over to publishing, and now I write graphic novels. So that wish in my 8th grade yearbook actually ended up coming true.
You manifested that.
That's right.
Is there anything about, like, would you go back into the animation industry? What career goals have shifted now that you've been in animation, you've published your own, stories and illustrations, and went the entrepreneurial side?
Yeah, I mean, the very first thing what happened when I got to Disney was there was a bunch of students who were starting in all the different departments, right? So we were the visual development department, but there was also animation and story. And from my schooling, like we didn't really know that story artist was a thing. Like we had a storyboarding class, but our storyboarding class was very much like feature animation storyboarding, which meant like you were just taking a script and directly translating it, which didn't feel like what I wanted to do. But you know, once I got to Disney and I was like, oh my God, that's a job. But it was already like a little too late because I was already in the visual development department. So like story writing, like those are kind of the fields that I'm more interested in terms of like returning to full-time animation work. I still freelance. I still do a lot of like development and biz dev stuff for studios that reach out to me. So it's not like I'm totally out of that world, but there is something about, you know, like you said, like the entrepreneurial side of just writing your own stories that is really fulfilling to me right now. And I'm really having a good time in that space too.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing. Gabby, your turn. Artist journey, go.
Artist journey. I don't even know where to begin. Let's see.
When you were 6 or 7, we can go way back.
Like, yeah, okay.
Black Friday.
I've always been seen with like a pencil or a crayon or a coloring book everywhere that we go. And I would just take a lot of art classes. My mom saw something in me that I was like, oh, maybe she likes drawing. So let's put her in all the drawing classes that we can find. And then high school, like I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I know like the minute I saw like The Little Mermaid, I was like, this is something like I want to do, but I don't know what I want to do. In high school, I took AP Studio Art, and then I learned about Ringling, and then learned that, oh, there's a computer animation program. Like, okay, cool, I'll try it. And then I thought I wanted to be an animator, but turns out animating is very hard. And so I just gravitated more towards just the creating of characters and just like the visual development side of animation. And yeah, and then so from there, I was lucky enough to be working in digital domain as a visive artist. First, I was like an apprentice, and then from there, let's see, it was like a year and a half, and then the studio went under. And then I went to Disney Mobile, where I worked on a game called Stack Rabbit a long time ago. And then from there, I jumped on to what I'm doing now, where it's like doing a lot of social media stuff, art and directing. I don't know. It's just like I've jumped up all over the place, but here I am.
Here you are.
That's
awesome. And at what point, like was there inspiration or somebody, an artist that you were following, where like it could have been in your teenager years where you're like, oh yes, this can be a career. This is somebody and somebody that I saw that I can follow, besides, you know, the Little Mermaid of movies, which is great.
Yeah.
Was there an individual that you're like,
yeah, so
can do it,
actually around, probably when I was around 12 or so, there were these drawing boards, kind of like what we're using right now, but without the cameras and stuff. But it was like a group drawing board. And I met a lot of people there that had like the same type of interest. So it was like it was a Powerpuff Girl community. And so the girl that I met that a lot of you may have probably heard is Loish or Lewis.
Oh.
And so we've known each other since we were like kids. And so it was just so funny to see like how we've grown into like what we are today. But so I looked up to her a lot. And so I don't know, that I think that's kind of where it started. Like, oh, I can see like a career doing this. And I just kept going, and here we are.
And here we are. That's awesome.
I don't know.
Well, you know, let's I think this was great. I think this was a great icebreaker, everybody. We got to know each other. We're drawing. We feel comfortable. So let's dive into some of the harder hitting questions. Are you guys ready for this?
Yes.
Next time I'll deliver some mimosas before we get into it. But let's talk about being a woman in our industry and potential obstacles that come with that. So anybody can jump in here. If there's a lull in conversation, I will call on somebody, but maybe somebody can jump in and talk about what are some obstacles you had to overcome to get where you are now, and whether it had to do with your gender or upbringing or anything like that. Like what what were those obstacles? And maybe it was like even self-imposed obstacles of imposter syndrome, or I know for myself of being an artist and not pursuing art is because I was too intimidated by everybody and I didn't want to compete with everyone personally. But you guys are in it. You're in it to win it. You made amazing careers for yourself, but what has those obstacles for you been? Like, what does that look like for you?
I mean, I think it's interesting you mentioned competition, because I think that that's definitely one that, as people of marginalized genders, we definitely feel a lot more acutely than I think other people will. I remember being compared to other, women and people who it felt like, there can only be one, like it was almost like this weird Highlander thing about it where, oh, well, you do girl art, which is different than real art. And, it was always like mildly insulting. And it was strange that like the people who said that to me never felt that way. Like they always felt like it was a compliment somehow. And yeah, like I think that that's something that was interesting to overcome, because you don't know how to address it in that moment. You're like, but what do you mean I draw like a girl? And why is that a distinction that is important?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that like there is sometimes a feeling of there is a right way to do things, and if you are not doing it that way, then you are, like failing to meet a certain standard. And I don't believe that. Like I've been in this industry for a while and I've seen a lot of different people with a lot of different talents. And I think it takes all this diversity in terms of thinking and style and, how we do things. That's what makes our films great and makes them different. But yeah, so I think that like, as a female artist, like not only are we competing with each other, but we're also kind of competing to break the box and, shatter that idea that there is one objective good, and maybe being like, hey, actually, yes, this is different, but maybe there's something valuable in that too. And, that can be really challenging to say to somebody who's been in the industry for like 20 or 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like it discouraged you or made you feel more determined to prove people wrong?
I think that like I hadn't really, although I had, like at the time I was like, oh, that's weird, that's never happened to me before. But being in my mid-30s now, I can look back and be like, oh no, that was happening to you constantly, all the time, always.
Mm-hmm.
So it was something that like I didn't really understand how to respond to, and I also didn't really see how harmful it was until much later. And at the time it didn't really faze me, because I think that I bought into that that paradigm though, the idea that like there is one supposed good thing to aim at. And I was like, yes, they're right, that must be the case, because everyone's saying that, and these people are like, longtime veterans, so that must be true. And it's not like it didn't spur me on, it didn't discourage me, because I just bought it as truth. And it's not until like much later, now that I like have the benefit of distance and perspective, that I can be like, no, actually what I was doing was just as valid and important and different, but like different's not bad. And it takes certain people in leadership to also accept that, to be like, yes, that's also something that is valuable, and that we are gonna make sure that that has a place here.
Totally agree. And do you feel like not just a place, but like being inclusive? Like, do you feel like leadership approached you differently than like a male counterpart with like similar assignments in any way? Or you would be given certain assignments because of gender?
I mean, I do think, I don't know about gender. I do think that like that we were definitely given assignments based on like our work. And I think that a lot of times our work was viewed as like we're doing the feminine work of like costuming and stuff like that, which is fine, because I also like those things. It's not like that's bad, but at the same time, it's like viewed as feminine and therefore viewed as lesser, which that did never feel good. Like that was definitely something that is like, oh, okay, like I see that we are stratified in a way, and like being good at something is kind of a gendered expectation, but like that is also who I am. Like, it's not like one or the other, you know? So yeah, I'm sorry. I think I lost the thread of the question. But,
no, you're totally,
yeah.
you're totally on the right. Yes, it's all within what we're talking about, 100%.
Yeah,
Gabby, Chrystin, Claire.
I would just
yes,
like
please.
to add on to that and say that I 100% felt the same way as Vicky, and that that it did feel like there was just like, okay, well, the feminine thing is good, but we already have somebody like that, so we don't need like any more of that. Like, and I guess that's kind of what you were saying, Vicky, about it feeling like it was less than what other people were doing. And I thought that it was really interesting to start seeing this conversation come up more and more when people started saying that the feminine voice was necessary in media, in art, in our storytelling, because specifically for that reason of feeling like it's not as important as somebody else's point of view, and having that come through in our media. I didn't realize that all of those feelings that I was feeling were being passed on to the kids watching the movies that we were making, and realizing, oh, this is more than just like a feeling of feeling left out. This is also a feeling of not, it's like a larger global issue than just myself.
What does that global issue look like? And what do you think kind of the solves are for that?
I think, hold on, I'm still trying to figure out my viewing thing. I think that the bigger issue is that what we make, well, one of the things that I was noticing was the process in which we make our art that goes out into the world is not limited in a bubble, but it is what gets projected out into the world. And even if we're saying like really inclusive things, the actual actions of making those stories really come through larger than what our overall peaceful message of the movie is, and the fact that women's voices in animation or in media in general are useful in order to get a different point of view across. Having that feminine point of view. Why is feminine, why does it have to feel less important? Why does it have to feel frivolous? Looking at Greta Gerwig's movies, I'm always just like, oh, this is wonderful, and it feels so feminine, and it feels so important, and I would love to see more stuff like that that's celebrated.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like
women's art often, sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
Oh, I was just saying, I feel like, especially in school, like we were kind of told that women's art tends to be decorative, and decorative as in a bad thing, as if like we can't be cerebral about it. But also, like, what's wrong with decorative? Most folk art is, you know, pushed aside as feminine because it is the type of art that people make in their homes, like quilting and, you know, all other types of various folk art. And you know, I think that for years and years, feminine art has always been kind of looked down on as something that is not true high art, because it's not as like, I don't know, it's perceived as less thoughtful. But I think there's nothing wrong with being decorative, especially because like we as a society and as humans have always responded to the decorative. Like that's why we've always drawn on walls and stuff, because it looks interesting and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, well, I also believe, like, from a psychological perspective, there's a lot that is that is communicated through art that we can't put words to. And there's a reason why certain paintings really, really resonate with people, and others don't. And I think that the decorative art is equally very much that importance of we're not always completely aware of everything that's being communicated, but it's important to communicate it anyway, even if it's just through art.
Totally agree. Gabby, Chrystin, do you have any?
This one's a tough one. I don't know.
I'm just thinking about how the point of what is considered like a feminine trade is always shifting, right? Like, oh, women are expected to cook in the kitchen, but when a man does it, he's a chef, right? Like, or if you look in the fashion industry, and it's also a male dominated industry, but then who are the people who usually get like made fun of for being interested in fashion? You know, it's usually women. So it's interesting. I think it all just boils down to sexism, and there's and women aren't a monolith, you know, and the feminine art, I feel like what even is that, you know, everyone's capable of drawing in different styles, and we're so diverse and so expansive. It just feels weird that there's a need to box us into a specific category and then not champion that. But then you see men who tap into that category later on and they are championed for it. And I think it's interesting. It's interesting to watch. Because it's not just like our field where this is an issue. So
yeah,
I just feel like, I don't know, like being a woman is not a bad, and it's not bad, and then like doing beautiful things is not mutually exclusive, you know, like I feel like we can do both. So it's like we don't have to be tied down to just doing like one specific thing. Like we can do cute things, but sometimes we can just do, I don't know, grudgy stuff, even though like that's not our thing. But like I feel like that just shouldn't be, we shouldn't be like put in the corner of like this is the only thing that we can do.
Almost like typecasting.
Yeah.
I feel like we could subtitle this panel with "Draw Like a Girl."
Put some sports.
And it's just funny. We're talking about like and it's funny how we're just talking about like, oh, all the flourish, and here I am drawing just that. But it's like it's not a bad thing. I don't see it as a bad thing. It's like it's just like, you know, it's like I think the demographic of like the consumer is mostly women. If you think about it, like it's so why not cater? I don't know.
Totally, 100%. We have a follow-up question from our YouTube audience, but she says, tough question. As a woman working with dominantly male team, have you ever felt that your voice was shut down? And if so, how do you navigate those scenarios? So if you're in a production meeting or a team meeting, and
honestly, it can be really, really challenging. And I, as like a person with my background, like I've always been kind of taught to defer to power and to defer to authority. So I'm like, okay. But I have had a lot of really great advocates who are people with more privilege than me. So either like white men or even white women who would be like, oh no, actually, I think that, you know, Vicky was saying something. Like that's really been the way that I've been able to speak up, because like if I push back, like I don't want to be seen as someone who is like difficult to work with. But, you know, when someone is like, oh no, actually, like, please continue, then that's always kind of been the easiest way for me to kind of navigate that system. And I know that that's challenging, but really what it is like me being sure that the people that you're working with respect you and that they're the people who will stand up for you in those challenging situations.
Yeah, I think advocates are super important in like allyships, especially in these times. And it is interesting because if a male speaks up, it's looked as empowered, right? Powerful and great presence and leader. But when we do it, it can be looked at as being difficult or challenging. And so it is an interesting balance. It's not right in any means. But I think the more that there's advocates and people in the room that can make sure our voices are heard, I think that I love that you've been surrounded by individuals like that.
Yeah, I think I've been really lucky. Like I've definitely had a lot of art directors who have valued like the things that I want to say and who want me to like present my own work. Of course, that has gone the opposite direction at times too. Like, you know, I think that we look at these studios and we think that they're all like this one little cohesive universe, but like every show is its own little universe. And every time you got to like restart and you got to relearn people and relearn whatever their stuff is, you know, who likes what and what kind of system are you working in. And, you know, actually the most challenging times are always when like those people didn't get along, and it's not anything to do with you. Like so much of it is outside of your control. But if you can go into a system where everyone, even like if you just have like one advocate, someone who like really, really believes in you. And I think that that's what was so great about like the Disney mentorship is that like we always went in with someone who had our back. You know, it was always like, you always had your mentor behind you who's always going to be like, oh, actually, here's the work that my mentee did. And here's kind of like, and you would help you, you know, so you didn't feel as alone and you didn't feel as like powerless as really you are. Like when you're a trainee, like you really have nothing, right? Like you're the lowest tier, but having that mentor who's there to like lift you up and really help be that advocate for you has really been like how I've been able to work that system.
Love that. Claire, Gabby, Chrystin.
I think it really depends on the situation, because some people don't realize that they're steamrolling, and sometimes a simple conversation like with them, if you feel comfortable doing that, could help. Or it could be just if you're feeling uncomfortable within meetings, just practicing speaking out more. But then there are other situations where I feel like when you can tell ego's involved, sometimes I'll just sit back and let it fly. It's one of those things where you really have to decide for yourself if it's worth the battle and if it's worth the friction. And I hate saying that, but yeah.
Yeah, I have kind of come to that conclusion lately as well, that it's because when I first started out, I was like very just said what I thought all the time, and then afterwards I started realizing, oh shoot, this is really rubbing people the wrong way. And I don't know if that was because I was a woman, or if because of the way that I was saying it, or because of who I am, and I don't know, but and so I've just I really don't have any clear answer for it yet in my world, but I do know that lately I've just had to kind of like just kind of think more about like the people that I'm speaking to, and whether or not there's an openness towards me for what I'm saying, whether or not that's because of what my position is compared to theirs, or because I'm a woman. All of that, I think it's more about just reading the room and judging whether or not my opinion is being asked for or wanted at this point. And I've noticed that my opinion is usually more welcomed if I'm more sensitive to I don't know, the right timing, I guess, which is probably basic human interaction.
Like
The
it's
whole
like you
reading
have
the
to be,
room.
yeah, I feel like it's also like it feels like you have to be almost careful of what you say, and right, yeah, or what's the situation, or like they're thinking about like something male driven, but then like, oh, did you ever think about it being, you know, including more, I don't know, it's hard to talk about this particular project, but yeah, I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
I think it's just a fine line. Like you want to be able to stand up for yourself, and you want to be able to express your opinions, but depending on your position, you know, 9 times out of 10, like for me, for example, I'm deferring to other people for the final, like, yes or no on an assignment. So I usually just, even if I disagree with my art director or an executive note, I'm kind of just like, well, whatever, you know, that's the way it is. However, if it's something that is more personal, like if I feel like a choice has been made that could be potentially problematic, then that's something that I will make more of an effort to like talk about and assert myself on, because that's something that I don't think I could just roll over for, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's
Picking and choosing your battles.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard because, like, yeah, so much of this position is soft skills, right? Like, we have to know how to talk to people. We have to know how to be a good team player. We have to do all those things, and that's super important. But there are definitely times when, like, the things that you want to say are challenging and make you difficult only because, like, you're not just going with the flow, right? Like, you are actually challenging people, and that's important, but you got to know when you're going to be heard. Like, there's something that I heard about activist circles where there's like a scale of 1 to 5. 1 is being someone who's completely diametrically opposed to you and your opinions. You know, like, I don't know, like, I'm not going to use an example, but like 1 is someone who's like definitely never going to ever be on your side. And like 5 is where you are. So if you have someone who's like a 3 or a 4, you're much more likely to be able to pull them in and get them to kind of see your point of view and be able to like understand where you're coming from. But then you also have to know, like, you need to be able to look at people and be like, okay, well, you're a 1 and you're a 2 and you're a 4, you know, so you kind of can know when is an appropriate time for you to like speak up and when you can say what you need to say.
You know, it's interesting that you break it down. I don't feel like our male counterparts have to think in those terms. You know what I mean? They're not like, is this person a 1? Am I a 5? Where am I in this? Yeah, and how? It's like they just do. It's interesting that we have to be more strategic with our approaches.
I don't know. I would have to say that I've worked with a lot of, I mean, obviously these are all really real generalizations, but I've worked with a lot of guys that are very diplomatic, and I think that it's something that they work hard at being, like very like kind of stoic in a way, or kind of like they kind of take things on, they look at people to see who's going to, it's like they do this more naturally than what I do, how I do it, I guess.
That makes sense.
Well,
it's good that you've been in that kind of space.
Yeah.
Have you, kind of flipping it, it's like for the, you know, individuals that are coming up, and as you've become creative leaders yourself, Janet had a question, which was, has anyone had the opportunity to advocate for someone in the room? So have you been able to step in and help navigate a conversation if you see somebody being talked over?
I don't think I've ever witnessed it necessarily.
Okay.
I've never.
Did I ever stand up for you in a meeting?
I think you did. Yeah, I definitely think that, like, as you know, you were the one who was advocating for my work. very early on, because like we had a really different system back then when we could actually work on the films as trainees, which you can't do anymore. And yeah, like you would help present my work for me, and really you modeled for me how to present, which I think was really important too. Even if it wasn't necessarily like, no one was talking over me necessarily, but still like you were definitely always there as kind of like an advocate and someone who made sure that like my work got seen and understood by people who were in the room.
But was there ever a moment where you felt like somebody wasn't listening to you and you had to
not really on that show, not really on Tangled. I think that like generally speaking that when we worked together on that, for a number of reasons, but yeah, like those guys were really great about hearing us and really like wanting to know my opinion, and you know, really directing the conversation towards me instead of just like not. And it was a really good experience for that reason. Like that's one of my favorite films that I worked on because everyone was so great about it. But yeah, like I think in subsequent projects things didn't go quite as well as they did, and I'm not calling anyone out. Like, you know, things are just different all the time. But yeah, I think that Tangled in particular, we had a really good group of people who were all really great at being able to like help advocate for me. And I think that also helped set the tone for the rest of my career, because that was my first project. So I got to kind of see like, oh, okay, like this is an ideal version of what that looks like. So yeah.
That's great. And then Deanna kind of has another question, or has a question, which feels like it kind of fits in this wheelhouse, which was, have you ever offered an idea and it was rejected at first, but then later down the line of production, they took that idea without giving you credit?
It's so hard because like these things are so collaborative, and like ideas are all just kind of churned through this big weird kaleidoscope, and then you're like, what comes from where and who says what, you know? So like I've definitely seen like bits of my rejected ideas go into final products, but I don't necessarily think that it's done with malice or really intent of any kind. It's just kind of the process.
Nature of the beast.
Yeah. And I also think that like ego and needing that is really, really harmful for anyone who wants to be in this environment, because it is so collaborative, and like every single thing is touched by like 90 different people, and it's really, really hard to trace back who did what. So, you know, that's why like in the credits, it's not like, you know, Victoria Ying responsible for like these 6 things. It's like Victoria Ying worked on this film, because that's how it is. You know, it's like, it's really, really hard to like nail down who said what, who did what. I know that there are definitely times when that has happened to other people, but it is really, really challenging, because the Viz Dev artist, I think that your main job is to have ideas that get thrown out. That is like most of what you do. Most of your ideas go straight into the garbage, and that's fine, because that's your job. You're here to like give the wrong answer so they can find the right answer. And so, you know, it's hard to kind of know like what came from where, who heard something, and like kind of mash it all together into the thing that it is. And then, you know, like that's the product. And, you know, I think that, I don't know, that's probably all I have to say about it.
Yeah.
No, that makes complete sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I also have kind of started taking it the opposite way, that like, I noticed that a lot of people, like I'll throw out an idea, and then, and people will be like, oh, and then somebody else will be like, what about this? I'm like, well, that was totally the idea that I just said. But it's like, it's almost as if, and they didn't know that they just like reiterated what I had just said, but it's like, oh, but that's still really good, because that means that we're both tapping into this like deeper well of some more collaborative thing that we want to say. And if that person's tapping into the same thing that I'm tapping into, then that's a really good sign. And I should just like take that as a win rather than as a slight or something that has to be overcome.
I think that's really important. To believe in good intentions too, right? Like everybody's probably working a million miles a minute. They like hear things. Maybe it's not even the idea might not have been right in that exact moment, right? And then as the project evolves, then that idea becomes like, oh, actually that does fit with what we're doing.
Yeah.
So it's, you know.
Yeah,
it's
it's
an
very possible
evolution.
that like your one idea was like not quite right, and then someone else kind of rewords it in a way where it strikes a chord with the director. Because what we're doing as visitive artists and everyone who's in this production is you're like playing this game of mind reader, and you are a team and you're all doing this together. So, you know, if someone can kind of crack the code by using what you made or like what you said, it's hard to be like, well, that was my idea, because like the whole job is about like, how can we all kind of develop this thing together? So yeah.
Yeah, you just hope that like at the end of the day, like you resonate as somebody who like can tap into that larger idea easily, and you're always right there, and people can recognize that, and just have good vibes about you. But if you start getting territorial over it, then that really kind of sends off the wrong vibe.
Oh yeah, like those are the worst people to work with. The people who are like, that little bit was my idea and they took it, and I'm like, oh God, who cares?
I know.
Like at the end of the day, you're working for the same team, you know, and it's like it's a collaborative effort where you just shouldn't have to be like, oh well, I claimed this and then you didn't do this. So I just feel like we're all basically we're just making art together and for the same reasons. So it just shouldn't have to be that way.
But like that's totally valid, because yeah, again, it can be construed as like, oh, you didn't contribute to this conversation, when like you clearly did. And as long as everyone is, you know, at the end of it, if everyone's like, yes, this person contributed a good deal to our project, even if like they didn't have the most pieces that made it to the film, and they still acknowledge your contribution as, you know, someone who gave ideas, someone who like was there and was really present, then I think that that's fine. But yeah, it can absolutely go the other direction where people forget that you were a part of it because your final art isn't in the art of book or something. That is definitely when I see the most like consternation, is when people like get the art of book and they're like, why is it these paintings and not my paintings? And I'm like, I don't know, who cares?
But again, no malicious intent. I'm sure it was, pivoting off of that a little bit, I would love to kind of dive in and looking at the art that you guys are drawing right now. And I should not say guys, I said you women are drawing right now. There's a lot of different styles, and even talking about your own kind of upbringings and what influenced you and kind of your own artistic journeys. Like there's some overlap with comics and art for sure. But I would love to hear how your own experiences impacted the development of your art style, and any advice for people who are looking to develop their own style. Like, how do you figure out what your point of view is as an artist? And also when it comes to that casting, we talked about casting of like kind of that feminine quality to kind of the illustrations, which looking at your artwork, I feel it's just your brand. Like, as far as this is your art, I don't see necessarily gender in it, but I see just amazing artwork. So like, how do you find your voice as an artist and your develop and your artistic style? Chrystin, why don't we start off with you?
Oh boy. I feel like my art style is always changing. And I think it has to, especially working in television animation. It's my job to conform to whatever the art direction is at the time. So whether I'm painting or designing, I need to be malleable. I need to be able to pivot to something pretty easily. So I'm not really married to a particular style, though I'm sure other people who look at my work maybe are just like, oh yeah, I can tell it's you. So maybe that's just my own observation, my self-observation. I forget the word for it, but I just draw what I like. And I think over the years, different artists and different films and even stage shows or architecture will influence me, and my art will continue to grow and develop from there. And I kind of like it that way. I never want to be stagnant. I think I'd be like a shark dead in the water if that happened.
Well, it is important to continue kind of building onto your own foundation and evolving, because the industry is always evolving. But at the same time, you guys, I think you all are very distinct in your styles. So while you may waver and try out different techniques, get into new technology, I do feel like there is a brand happening with what you do, and it's so fantastic. But I know for myself, like when I was taking art classes, I would mimic a lot of different artists and like their styles until I could figure out the way that I wanted to paint or draw. Did you find the same kind of evolution of your own artistic craft? Was there artists that you kind of mimicked for a while, or artists in the industry that you kind of copied in their technique until you figured out how to develop your own kind of technique from there and style?
Oh yeah, I feel like for me anyway, seeing someone else's art that I admire and then trying to what would they call that, like backwards engineer those techniques, I think that's super, super fun. And I would do that all the time. And also I feel nothing is ever created in a vacuum, right? So even if I'm trying to create something 100% original, I'm sure all of my influences come through regardless. But yeah, looking at other people's art definitely helps inform your own personal preferences and design leanings.
Now people are looking at your art and deciding like which direction and how you influence them. You guys are you are now the beacons that are guiding the industry. No pressure, no pressure. Gabby, how about you?
For me, I just feel like growing up, I didn't see a lot of people that look like me. So I try to put that into my own work so that, you know, if others see that, then maybe like, oh, they feel represented, or, you know, I'm gonna like start crying. I'm not gonna start crying, but you know, it's like I feel
like the Diane Sawyer.
I know, like no, I just feel like I want to put a lot of that into my work, because it's like I see a lot of like the same type of faces, the same type of bodies, or like the same type of like skin tone. So it's like I want to bring that into light of like there's other colors out there, there's other ethnicities out there. So it's like that's what I try to put into my own work, and hopefully like make others feel seen.
I love that. I love that. And thank you for doing that, Gabby. And it definitely comes through. I love your illustrations and your character designs. Like your colors are so impactful, and your shape language, it's amazing. So
no, it's like it's also like when I visit like Mexico, I see like all the buildings or like all the stores and shops, it's just full of color. And then you come here and then you see all the walls are like gray or like beige, and like it's so basic. Like we need some color. So it's like you might as well use it. And so that's why I like splatter on everything that I can find.
Yeah, the US is super basic. I totally Claire, Victoria, how about you guys?
I think like style has always been an interesting question, because I feel like I also don't have a style because I've been very production oriented, but also like I'm very bored easily. Like things, I want to try new things. Like doing a comic book that's like 250 pages and every page has to look the same, like that's really hard for me. But one thing that you find is that like you don't find your style finds you. You are your influences. What you draw, what you make kind of comes out of your own voice and the stuff that you like. So like I think that people shouldn't stress so much about finding their own style, because you probably have one already, and the more you draw, the more that's going to kind of come out of you, and it's just going to be like what comes natural to you. What do you like drawing? Like that's really what style is. And yeah, I think the more that you like kind of focus on it, the like less likely you're really going to be able to like tap into it, because I think that like yeah, you kind of need to relax sometimes when it comes to those types of issues.
Yeah, I agree that the style is just within you. You just need to kind of practice getting it out, and the more you can just get comfortable drawing, the more that style is going to just start coming out naturally. Even if that means that you're copying somebody else's style in order to just learn something, if that's where you are being called to like really kind of take in your own, to learn on your own or something like that, like then eventually your style is going to come out, even if you're being influenced by somebody else. Oftentimes people, because I have lots of different styles that I use or different techniques, and for different things, so I often think that I don't really have a style. And sometimes people will be like, oh, I totally saw that was your stuff up there. And I was like, how would you know that? I've never used a technique like that before. And I realized afterwards that what they're picking up on is like just some kind of what I was talking about before, like that unspoken thing that people pick up on, that just comes through in somebody's artwork that isn't necessarily spoken, but it's just there. And I think the style is very much that world.
That makes sense. I would like to go back to a question that Anika had, who's one of the audience participants today. And she asked, how do you get jobs doing comics or book illustration, graphic novels? And in Nika's case, she has not gone to art school. So what advice would you give her for pursuing these sorts of positions within the industry?
So, so we're talking about specifically comics and graphic novels. I think that, like, oops, sorry. You have to like have done them, right? So like you have to have done a comic for someone to trust you to do Spider-Man, right? So you have to either pair with a writer or write your own comics, basically. Do your own short comics. Do stuff that like you want to get work in and do it for free. And that's kind of how you'll eventually get work, right? It's like if you're doing a viz dev portfolio, you're doing free viz dev for like a fake project, right? In the same way that like if you want to do comics, you need to do like comics for whatever your own projects are. For me, I've been doing comics for the last like 4 years. And I've written most of them. So like that's a big part of it too. Writing your own books is going to be a huge way up for you to start doing that work too, because you don't have to wait for anybody. If you're just waiting around to get clients from comics and graphic novels, it's possible, but it's a lot more likely if you already have samples that are done that are like, here's comics that I've written or comics that I've done and illustrated. So that's probably my biggest advice to anyone who wants to do comics. Write your own shorts, draw shorts, and if you can't write them, pair with somebody who does write them, so then you can prove that you understand how comics work, because it's a very specific medium.
And how about like looks like book illustrations as well? Is it the same thing, like creating your own potential book illustration, or like would you recommend taking, I don't know, like your version of Little Red Riding Hood and how you would illustrate it? Like what kind of assignments could one give themselves and then put on social media, whether it's Instagram or ArtStation or Twitter, to showcase their skill sets?
Yeah, I would say that any of that is if you're really kind of starting from scratch, give yourself an assignment and go for it, because people, even though you might be completely capable of doing a comic book or a picture book or doing a visual development, people won't be able to just jump to that conclusion unless they actually see that you've done it.
Yeah, like if you have a portfolio full of figure drawings, no one's going to know that you can do character design. So you need to actually show that you can do the job that you're applying for, even if you've never done it before.
Yeah.
Is there outside of looking on Instagram, looking at like children's books and graphic novels that are already been created, is there any other resources that you get that anyone can recommend that could be useful?
For children's books and graphic novels, you know, the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators, SCBWI, is really good. I highly recommend like checking out their website and seeing their events and stuff. I think that that's really good. I know LightBox, we have a few other panels too where you can get some more information about book illustration and graphic novels. Yeah, so that's definitely where I'd start.
Awesome. And we have another question. We only have about 10 minutes left, so I'm getting through some of the questions from the audience. We have one from Renaissance Girl, who asks, have you dealt with issues pertaining to neurodiversity, ADHD, autism, etc. in the work field?
I mean, I have. I feel like I'm talking a lot, but yeah, it's like I have ADHD, fairly severe ADHD, which, you know, on the one hand is really challenging sometimes, but on the other hand has been very hugely helpful to my own development as an artist and finding my own voice, leaning into some of those things that make you special in terms of like neurodiversity can be really, really helpful. You will have to find coping mechanisms and strategies that are going to help you work in an environment with things like deadlines and stuff, but those things can be a blessing and they can be something that you don't necessarily turn away from, especially as a creative person. Like I think that there is a lot more room in this field of work than there would be in other places. What
coping mechanisms have you adopted?
So one big one I have is this like visual timer. I got it on Amazon. You turn it and then it'll like time you a specific amount of time. So this is like an hour, it's 15 minutes. So I can just turn it and be like 15 minutes, go, and then it'll start. Turn it back, it'll be the clock again. But I can do like 15-minute intervals very quickly. And I know that like, even if I'm struggling doing a painting or doing like client work, I'll be like, I only have to work on it for 15 minutes. That's not very long. And then I can like take 5 minutes to like take a break, look at Twitter, do what other things. And then like at the end of the day, you realize that you actually got a lot of work done because you really sat down and focused. Because I think for a lot of ADHD people, the idea of like this expanse of time can be really, really challenging because we can't really understand the passage of time. So this timer, even if I'm not using it to block out my time like a Pomodoro, it can still help me rhythm out my time. So then I'm like, okay, like 15 minutes has passed. Okay, great. At least now I know that. And that is still helpful.
Thank you for sharing. Gabby, I think you're muted.
I think for me, like, I didn't realize I had this until until the pandemic, I think, started, where I have like anxiety, but turns out it's like a high functioning anxiety. So like, let's say if an emergency happens, like, I know like I had to act like immediately, like if something happens and like I have all of my documents ready, or like, so I feel like with that comes a lot of responsibility. So it's like, if I don't do something on time, then it's like the anxiety kicks in, like, oh, you have to do it. So then I have to do it. So it's a blessing and a curse, I feel. So to add to like a coping mechanism, for me, I feel like is my shop, because it keeps me busy and it's just something else that I can do besides like work, you know? So it's like, it's an outlet because I have control and only me, I can give like directions and stuff like that. So I feel like that's the, I don't know, that's the anxiety in me of how I cope with that.
Thank you for sharing.
I don't know if others feel kind of something similar in that sense.
Claire, Krista.
Well, I struggle with procrastination, which I don't know if is that what you were talking about, Victoria? That like your ADHD
can be could be a symptom,
because it's just, you think of all that you have to do and it becomes overwhelming, and so you just go on Twitter or something.
That happens. Yep.
Yeah, I have that.
I feel like I procrastinate with work, if that makes sense. Like if I get nervous about a project, that I'm on, I'll redo it over and over and over again until there's like very little time left, like the deadline's coming up, and then someone I can just fart everything out. And it's like, this is okay. This is what we're dealing with. So I don't know what that is, but that's a bad habit.
You procrastinate by doing what you're procrastinating?
Yeah, it's like I'm afraid to make a decision. And I think I've convinced myself that all my early iterations aren't good enough. So I just do it again and again and again.
And over and over and over, like obsessively.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
So that's my struggle.
Yeah.
But like Vicki, I also set timers for myself because of that. I'll set a 2-hour timer and I'll be like, all right, well, you have to get up and walk away from this so you can stop hyper focusing on it. And that's helpful.
Yeah. There was a time on Rapunzel where I was like doing like some paint over on a model or something. And I was like getting into the details and I was all in Photoshop. And I really like Lorelei Beauvais was sitting next to me and she would come out with her little gouache paintings, and every day at lunch she would take out her gouache paintings and she would do her personal work, and I would just be so envious, like, oh, that is so amazing. She can just take her brush and paint directly on the paper without like agonizing over it. And I was just so far away from that because I had been in Photoshop world for so long. And around that time I was taking improv classes, which is like getting up on stage and you yes and whatever anybody does on stage. And so I was like, what if I brought that idea of improv into my drawings and I just kind of went with whatever mark that I make on the paper, what if I just like accept it and keep going with it? And so I started doing that at home, and it really helped open me up to, I don't know, just be able to work in regular medium again, and then just kind of try to keep that going even in my digital work as well. But just kind of keeping that improv spirit in mind while I'm working kind of helps me not obsess over how I did a fingernail on a character or something.
I love that. I use the yes and in my everyday. I think we should all adopt that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody should adopt it. It would make conversations so much more healthy and our own day-to-day work. All right, so we have basically 3 minutes. So I'm going to do kind of speed question here, or just one more question, but just quickly answer. And we'll start with Chrystin. But how do you balance drawing as a passion versus drawing as work? And I think this really ties into our last conversation of like, there's so many things going around us right now, whether it's, dealing with this pandemic, anxiety, our life, the yes ands of the world, and keeping a positive attitude, but also wanting to do stuff for ourselves and feeling like there's not really much of a break to find those spots. So I just took up a whole minute explaining that question when I didn't need to. So I'll kick it back off to you, Chrystin, to answer. How do you balance drawing as passion versus drawing as work?
I think it's pretty easy for me because when I'm on the job, I'm deferring to somebody else's direction. So when I'm drawing at home, I really get to explore my own stories and my own characters, and I'm super excited about that. So making that mental shift is fine, but when it comes to finding the time to do that, I think that's something I struggle with because I'm always terrified that I'm just gonna wind up with 0 jobs and have to leave LA again, because that is something that happened to me in the past. So I tend to take on more work than I should and get less time to work on personal projects. So I think just making sure my finances are in order so that I don't feel so anxious about that, and allowing myself to create. I think that's my goal for 2022.
Love it. Good goal.
Wow,
It's a terrific goal. Gabby, you're next.
I feel like I touched up a little bit on that, where it's like I try to break work versus my own stuff. So it's like you don't lose like how you kind of draw in a sense. So you kind of, I don't know, I just explore by making other things that's not art or just different mediums. And if you're not having fun, then it's not working. So then if what I'm drawing is not making me happy, then I just switch to something else. It doesn't even answer the question, but yeah.
No, it does. It 100% does. And I think that is really helpful and useful information for the audience for sure. So thank you so much for sharing. Victoria.
I have a really quick answer because I don't. There's basically no balance in my life because I basically only draw when I'm doing work now. And I don't know, it doesn't bother me so much because I find that my work now is my work, like it's very separate from me, and I live my life as my life. And having those two things be separate has actually been really healthy for me. So, I don't know that you need to draw in your off time in order to be considered like an artist and have this be your passion and the thing that you want to do and give to the world. I said that was going to be short, but it wasn't. Anyways.
No, that was great. That was great. And Claire, round us out.
Yeah, I would. I agree with Vicky. I do very little drawing on my own these days, but that's also because of COVID and kids and just like not having the time. But also, I would say that my goal in my life in general is that the work that I'm doing is my creative outlet. I would really like for that time spent during those 9 hours a day to be part of like my creative person. And I don't have time to do personal stuff after work. So that's kind of, and just to like go back to Vicky, I feel like what you've been doing, you just came out with your comic book, your second comic book that you wrote.
Yeah.
And that's pretty personal. That's true.
Yeah.
Not just like doing your work and just like separating your life from your work. That's like fully integrated, and that's where I want to be.
Yeah. Thanks, sir.
I like that shout out. I love women supporting women. This has been an amazing panel, great combo. It was a perfect, at least for me personally, a great way to spend my Friday afternoon. And I want to thank everyone, Chrystin, Gabby, Victoria, Claire, for hanging out with us. Wacom LightBox Expo, WIA, thank you so much for hosting us. And Erin, we're going to kick it back over to you for any additional closing remarks.
Thank you, Alison. I agree. That was an amazing session. And I know I related to a lot of the discussion. And so I hope all of our audience benefited from the time together as well.